the human body and the medical staff has not evolved as fast as the game. The game went from a banging down low, dunks, outside or inside to outside, and now it's outside to inside kind of. And you're asking your big men to do way more. I hate picking on Shaq because I think he would have found a way to do it because he was just so elite. But can you imagine him trying to guard the 3-point line? Like, I think, Dallas tried to do it when they invested in Rafe LaFrance and said, Don Nelson said he was going to help stretch the full, but that was still clearly not there yet. So, but those guys have to cover more ground, and it's not just our bigs, our power forwards, our guards have to cover more because you can't just sit back and you can't wait. You've got to extend out. You've got to come back. I mean, guys are shooting 3 feet, 6 feet behind the 3-point line. So you're extending that. The floor has become so spread out. It's just more start, stop, and wear and tear on the body. So I think that's a contributing factor as well as to why we're seeing, especially these soft tissue injuries like the Achilles, because the guys are having to physically do more.
Based on just the trend of injuries, Achilles injuries to notable NBA superstars, Tyrese Haliburton, Jayson Tatum, Damian Lillard. I mean, it's killing me saying this. James Wiseman, Isaiah Jackson, Dejounte Murray, Drew Smith. I mean, just brutal just throughout the last year and the playoffs. So in your opinion, is this a fluke, or do you think this is a problem that we're going to keep seeing, in seasons coming up?
I think that's the big question. And I hope everyone I think everyone's crossing their fingers. This is kind of an outlier, having really what it came down to 8 Achilles tears, starting with last year's summer league all the way through this year, or through the game 7 of the finals. You know what I mean? Like that last ditch. That's a spike. That's big. But we've had some spikes like this before. We've had seasons with 5, 4 or 5, but even that's double, we're double with what we were. So I think it's something the NBA is evaluating. I think it's medical staffs around the league are evaluating. Because it's a troubling injury, because that injury is going to have an impact on this upcoming season. We're going to see extended absences from very well-known guys, but even if it weren't necessarily guys like Haliburton or Tatum, and you had 8 Achilles tears, hopefully it's something you kind of get a little bit alarmed about, because I do think this is it used to be a career-altering, career-changing injury. It's not necessarily as much anymore, but it's still super impactful. You're still got to pay those guys their salaries. They're going to miss substantial time. It's going to change the franchise. You kind of look at the Celtics. They kind of took a hard pivot. I think a lot of what they did this summer was predicated on the fact that Tatum was not going to be available this year. So, I hope it's kind of a flash, but it's been a little bit of an upward trend of the last couple of years anyway. So I think there's enough evidence to suggest that it's something we need to take seriously. But hopefully this is the peak and we don't go any higher.
Yeah, I want to go back to something you said there, just about how the Achilles used to be a career-altering injury, and I go back to even ACL tears, right? Danny Manning, Bernard King. I mean, you go back, and it used to be an injury like this, or an ACL tear back in the 80s and 90s, was pretty much your career was over. You were kind of relegated to hopefully being a bench player. But now it seems like the recovery times are not only faster, but more complete. What drives that? Is that yeah.
It's kind of a loaded question. I think some of the technique has improved surgically. I don't necessarily think it's drastically different. Maybe some of the tools and techniques have improved a little bit, especially with the ACL. I think maybe in recent years we haven't made necessarily massive improvements, but the technique hasn't evolved over time. Some of the locations for the grafts of ACL injuries are now being evaluated as more effective versus other places and those kinds of things. There's new techniques with suturing with regards to the tendon, with the Achilles tendon. They're bracing as they repair the tear as well. I think that technique got some notoriety with Aaron Rodgers and the Jets when he tore his Achilles. And then is he going to come back this season? Is that even possible? And I think there was this kind of belief that this was a new novel technique that they were using on Rodgers, and that he was going to be the first one. It's been used for a while. It just kind of got some more attention with a guy of Rodgers' stature having that approach. So that's definitely changed. I also think the way we manage and handle injuries has changed, recovery and what we know about the body and the way to load the body, and physical therapy techniques, rehab and treatment techniques have improved. So we know a little bit more about how to handle them once they've occurred versus, okay, what do we do now that we're playing scramble mode? Plus preventative care has probably improved a little bit in terms of we know certain things about like quad to hamstring ratios for the leg for hamstring for ACL tears is a risk factor. Are we doing better preventative care so that maybe they're not happening as frequently as they had in the past, and in some cases potentially even, we can do things to prepare the individual for surgery once it does have to happen, and then they're better equipped coming out, which helps potentially shorten that recovery window.
So you mentioned preventative care. So in the case of Haliburton, Jayson Tatum, and then Kevin Durant, there's a lot of debate in terms of previous injuries leading to their Achilles tear. So in your opinion, when there's a high pressure game, the NBA Finals, and when you have an athlete that has an injury similar to the gentleman that is mentioned earlier, what do you think the best course of action is in the future? Do you think teams are going to be a lot more cautious in setting them? It's tough. I mean, the championship's on the line. These are these guys' dream. And in a moment, they're willing to go through a brick wall to reach their ultimate goal. But at the same time, like you mentioned, there are disastrous consequences to the course of action that's in the moment. So in your opinion, to the best of your estimation, where do you think, well, one, what do you think the best course of action is? And two, where do you think teams are going to go just based on this most recent history of Achilles tears?
I think I kind of always start this question with, what's the first thing we hear out of a coach's mouth when a guy says, well, if this had been the playoffs, he'd be playing. And all that simply means is that your return to play protocol has a little bit of subjective component of it, which is okay. You're going to get information from the feedback from the athlete. You want that, right? You can't just simply hit check marks and understand and expect that's going to be the be all of if that player is going to return, because if they're hitting all those physical markers but still aren't there mentally, they shouldn't be back out there playing. They need to be able to express it. And that's where good staffs find that balance of, can we listen to our player? I have no doubt in my mind, because the Pacers medical staff is one of the best in the league, historically great, long tenure there. They've been together for a long time. That they presented the entire case to Haliburton, and it ultimately came down to risk mitigation. Where do we stand? And then it comes down to, okay, well, I'm comfortable as a player with those risks. I'm going to go out there and play. And he was playing phenomenally before he got hurt, and sometimes it's just fluky. Even if it had been necessarily, they could have done everything right, and maybe it was going to happen anyway. You know what I mean? So I think there are some things that we want to be very black and white when it comes to injuries, and it's definitely more gray. I definitely think there's no easy answer. If there was a cure for injuries, right? Like, I wouldn't be talking to you guys, because we would all have already done that. I always tell people, athletic trainers and medical staff, we're in the business of risk mitigation. And it's not, there's always going to be a level of risk. I've seen guys literally tear their Achilles walking across the weight room. They just stepped funny. They had weights in their hands. Boom, the Achilles goes. It's just to a degree unlucky. You can't account for a guy's throwing an elbow to your face and you break your skull. You know what I mean? Like, there's no preventative care that's going to, prevent that. I think about Joel Embiid a lot. Like, yes, some of those injuries are inherent because of his bad back, bad knees, bad hips, that kind of stuff, or foot, but he's also gotten ridiculously unlucky. And so I think there is this approach of, well, why can't we just, turn injuries off, right? That's the 2K saying, just turn injuries off. I wish that were the case, but what we can do is mitigate that risk. So we can prepare our players, our individuals, to do everything they can that the risk of an injury is at its lowest. There's always going to be a degree of risk. Now, some guys might be sick. That's going to elevate their risk. Some guys might have a previous injury. That's going to elevate their risk. How can we offset that? How can we explain that to our players so they understand what their risks are? And that's where I think a term like load management has kind of gotten a bad rap. I think originally what it was designed to do is let these players provide feedback and understand, hey, you might be at high risk for an injury, so we're going to sit you for this game. But it's kind of taken on load management is just code for rest, and these guys are lazy. Most of these guys don't want that rest, but whatever the approach is by the medical staff, they're saying, hey, your risk for re-injury or a new injury is high. We're going to hold you back or scale back your load and do some things behind the scene that might put you in a better place long term. Again, it's very fluid. It's not always black and white. And I think you'll see some teams potentially be more cautious with things and take more of the medical staff side than the player. But the answer is really it's somewhere in between.
Yeah, I mean, I think Tyrese's Achilles is going to be right up there with Chris Paul's hamstring for what if moments in NBA playoff history. And Kevin Durant's Achilles and Klay Thompson and all the injuries we've seen in the last two rounds of the playoffs. Is there a player who missed significant time last year due to an injury that you think is going to come back really strong this year? I think Embiid, but I mean, is there somebody who's not on the radar who's gonna come out and be like, okay, I'm ready to go again. It's my comeback.
And I'm a Dallas guy. I'm really interested to see what Derrick Lively does. He, had a great rookie season, was part of that finals run, and then was really slowed last year by foot injuries. That was kind of, obviously the Luka trade and then AD's injury when he made his home debut were big talking points. And of course, Kyrie's ACL, but the injuries up and down that roster were another thing that were worth mentioning and looking at, because Lively missed significant time. PJ Washington missed time. They had a lot of guys kind of in and out. I mean, at one point they were afraid they were going to have to forfeit a game due to how many players were injured and banged up. And Lively's one of those guys that, seeing him next to AD, what that's going to look like potentially, what's Gafford, how is that 3-man? Because that front court in Dallas is extremely loaded. But Lively's a guy that had some injuries, missed some time last year, that I'm cautiously optimistic of, and seeing him alongside another Duke guy like Cooper Flagg. Again, I may be a little Dallas bias here, but I'm excited to see what potentially Lively can do coming back off of last year's injury.
So I want to get your opinion on something, Jeff. And I've seen this from older NBA players, and they have expressed their concern about AAU and the Nike Elite Youth Basketball League in terms of a lot of younger athletes, getting a lot more time on the court compared to when they were younger, just playing in high school or pickup games, and that leading to more injuries. Now, there's been articles written about this with some data. I'm just wondering, do you think that data has some validity to it, or do you think it's unfounded and it's just kind of like a coincidence in terms of a lot of the athletes now, especially top prospects? I mean, they're playing AAU, they're playing, international ball, along with high school. I mean, the workload has picked up by the time they get into the pros. And you're not even talking about international players as well coming over to play in the NBA. So do you think that has a contributing factor into possibly an increase of injuries, or do you think it's just unfounded?
I think there's some validity to it for sure. I think it's one of multiple factors that are going into our increase in injuries. I think it's one that could potentially, be curtailed a little bit if we took a grassroots approach and really educated some of these guys, maybe even put limitations on how many minutes these guys can play. You saw this response in minor league or little league baseball, right? In terms of the elbow epidemic and the Tommy John epidemic, they took steps to make sure that these kids weren't throwing as much. And really what it boils down to for me is not necessarily AAU or any specific league. It's the fact that kids are specializing at such a young age instead of playing multiple sports and being multi-sport athletes. And so what happens is, as they are developing, they are loading their body in one specific pattern. So they're coming into high school, coming into college with way more mileage on their legs, on those joints, that are just doing the repetitive same patterns over and over again. I always tell people we rotate the tires on our car, right? Because we don't want that tread pattern to be worn down. We don't want to wear our tires down. So we rotate. Multi-sport athletes do the same thing. If you play soccer, you're going to load your body differently than if you then left soccer and went and played baseball for the summer. Or if you, once baseball was over, you shifted to football and then you shift to basketball. That's how we did things and I hate to play that old man card, right? But that's how I did things growing up, is you rotated sports. You didn't specialize. And we see this not just in basketball. We see this in volleyball and our female athletes that are specializing. We see this in our club soccer kids that are specializing at such an early age. Physically, they're getting worn down. And then you're seeing a lot of burnout too in high school kids and college kids coming in that have been playing the same sport with no change of pace basically their whole lives. And they're burnt out. They're tired of doing it. So you're finding this happy balance between that. And so yes, I do think there's some chance that these guys playing as much as they are and not playing anything else, because really that's what's happening. You're not seeing, even LeBron was a multi-sport athlete. You know what I mean? He played football for a while before deciding to focus on basketball. So he was able to develop, and that probably helped his hand-eye coordination a little bit. It helped his body develop in a specific way. So one of the things I loved when I'm looking at draft prospects in the NBA is I like looking for multi-sport athletes. Did this guy do anything else? Because that's gonna help me believe that the risk of some chronic issue right out the gate is going to be a little bit lower than another guy who's played basketball basically since he was 8 years old and done nothing else.
Oh, that's interesting. Makes me feel a lot better about my son doing tennis and basketball.
And tennis is great because that's such a lateral based movement as opposed to just that constant up and down start stop. Yes, it's a lot of start stop, but it is a completely different low pattern. You talk to some of the older players that had long, lengthy careers, like Dirk Nowitzki. Dirk said he loved playing tennis growing up. He got too tall to be a tennis player, right? But he's always had bionic ankles, and I wonder if that's some of his development with Holger, but then also and with the way he grew up playing handball and tennis.
Oh, that's interesting about the bionic ankles and stuff because my son, I mean, he's double jointed in a lot of places, and his tennis coach was like, "How are you hitting that backhand like that? I would break my wrist," because his grip was wrong. So it's just funny. Is that a thing that like is as like helpful for athletes if they're double jointed?
I mean, it definitely. So it doesn't mean you have two joints, right? Like I think a lot of people think like, oh wow, you have an extra joint. A lot of times it simply means there's more laxity in the joint, so there's more give. The joint is able to move in a greater degree of range of motion. Sometimes it can be a good thing, sometimes it can be a bad thing. Your knee may not be as stable, those kinds of things. Because that's the idea, right? Our ligaments are supposed to stabilize and provide stability and fortify our joints. But if some of those are a little bit more stretchy and we got a little bit, if some people figure out how to find a way to make it to an advantage for them, absolutely, I love seeing it.
So heading into this upcoming season, are there any trends that are, on the top of mind in terms of what you're watching for in terms of the leagues of the NBA?
Yeah, well, I'm always happy to get out of international play without any major injuries. And I know Eurobasket's getting close to being done. I will be very happy when that's over and there's no big, altering injury. I'm glad. I wish Slovenia and Luka would have kept going because I would have loved to see them play. But Lakers fans have to be taking a little bit of a sigh of relief. Okay, he made it out without getting hurt because he was shouldering a huge weight with that team. Now he can focus on the next stage, and that's getting ready for the season. It was relatively quiet this summer in terms of injuries, and then we hit this double whammy last week with Sorber from Oklahoma City tearing his ACL in a workout, and then I think the same day, not long after, it came out that Dylan Harper tore the ligament in his thumb. So we're already entering the year with a couple guys have some question marks. I'm interested to see how the veterans in Philadelphia do. I want to see how Embiid looks. I want to see how Paul George looks after he kind of had that weird kind of out of nowhere summer surgery on his knee. So you've got a couple other guys that are looking to come back from stuff. And so I'm interested to see how they do. I know Jaren Jackson and Zach Edey and Memphis have got some issues. So we've already got some concerns, but I'm interested to teams to start to report and how our guys on the court, what do they look like? We're officially going to be in that season of everyone looks like they're in the best shape of their life, like we always get, in training camp and that kind of thing. But you can see a lot of that, like what guys are actually available on the court doing stuff versus other guys. They're still nursing a couple things that were maybe lingering since summer league or college for rookies, or even, last season with a couple of these guys.
Yeah, I'm still waiting for the annual Ben Simmons is hitting his threes video to come out. So I don't know if it's dropped yet. And I think for Sorber, at least he's at OKC. It's a good spot for someone to be. I mean, we saw it last year with Topic, right? So it's a good spot to be if you're going to be out for the year. And they've got from what I understand, they've got a great staff, medical staff and everything. So yeah.
And there's always context to injuries, right? Like when you look at it, Oklahoma City had one of the higher ranked injury totals last year, particularly for any champion. And part of that was because they had a rookie who probably wasn't going to play much anyway, miss 82 games due to that injury, which allowed them to fall. And that's, basically this will be the third year in a row where they have a guy miss the whole season, because Chet, remember, missed the year before with the foot injury. So, you get kind of these injuries that impact the medical staff's rankings, but yeah, sometimes it's situational and it's location, and that can be a little bit of a blessing in disguise in terms of just it's a chance to basically kind of take a medical red shirt and learn, and it clears up a logjam potentially for Oklahoma City, because they're just so deep and they've got so much talent.
Yeah, you talked about Eurobasket, and I'm super worried. My team's Houston, so I'm obviously watching Turkey with both glee and also dread. Now going back to the Yao Ming years where China really played Yao like crazy in the summers to qualify for the Olympics, and a lot of wear and tear on his body that obviously translated into a very short NBA career. Is that a concern still with international play and stuff like Eurobasket?
I think if you gave truth serum to all the leagues, or all the teams around the league, I think they prefer their guys not play, just because it's like we talked about earlier. It's inherent injury risk. Every time you play, there's a chance that something's going to happen. Would I rather my guy be relaxing, getting his mind right and body prepared for the upcoming season? Yes. Do I appreciate him wanting to go represent his country and do those kinds of things? Absolutely 100%, right? Like, again, as a Dallas guy, every time Dirk took the court for Germany, I was excited, but also like extremely nervous. Like, please don't let anything go wrong. But Yao, we haven't had a ton of like drastically altering injuries in your international play. We've seen some. I think Exum tore his ACL, well, with Australia maybe, if I remember correctly. Yao was such a unique case because it was all foot injuries and he was just so big. Like he was not only like tall, but he was physically large. Like he looked a little bit skinny, like compared to like a guy like Shaq. But Yao's legs were like tree trunks, man. I was fortunate enough to stand by him one time, and it was just like you're looking at it and you're like, no, that is not physically possible. Like how, and like that's what happened with him is his feet just gave out. It was his feet couldn't withstand the wear and tear of carrying that frame around and doing as much as he was doing. So, I haven't seen anything that like would tell me, hey, all these guys need to stop playing international ball, but again, there's a degree of risk and it's checks and balances and you hope, like I said, everybody kind of comes out unscathed and, like Bogdanovich got injured, he got a hamstring injury. And so now he's going back to the Clippers and they're going to reevaluate and we'll see where that is. And that's, again, another thing I'm looking as we get into, teams start reporting back and whatnot.
To your point with big men, I want to ask, as there's been a lot more discussion of the 3-point shot, big men are playing more away from the basket. And I'm just wondering, do you see a correlation of different injuries of your big man not playing in the post as much, but taking more 3-point shots, playing more perimeter ball? I'm just curious, is there a correlation with injuries there?
So I think we're seeing that not just with big men. I think we're seeing it across the board. I think that's the other one of the other factors with that AAU approach that is resulting in this increase of injuries. I think the human body and the medical staff has not evolved as fast as the game. The game went from a banging down low, dunks, outside or inside to outside, and now it's outside to inside kind of, and you're asking your big men to do way more. I hate picking on Shaq because I think he would have found a way to do it because he was just so elite. But can you imagine him trying to guard the 3-point line? Like, I think, Dallas tried to do it when they invested in Raef LaFrance and said, Don Nelson said he was going to help stretch the floor, but that was still clearly not there yet. So, but those guys have to cover more ground. And it's not just our bigs, our power forwards, our guards have to cover more because you can't just sit back and you can't wait. You've got to extend out. You've got to come back. I mean, guys are shooting 3 feet, 6 feet behind the 3-point line. So you're extending that. The floor has become so spread out. It's just more start, stop, and wear and tear on the body. So I think that's a contributing factor as well as to why we're seeing, especially these soft tissue injuries like the Achilles, because the guys are having to physically do more. Yes, they have more advantages at their disposal. They're dietitians and training staffs and private jets and those kinds of things. But the game has changed so rapidly that we're trying to play catch up. And we might have actually reached the point where the game is pushing the physical boundaries of the human body. Like the biggest, strongest guys are now failing as well in terms of what their body can allow them to do. And that's a little bit worrisome and why we need to try to find those ways again to offset and mitigate some of that risk.
Do you think that would be like rule changes or anything like that might happen in the NBA to kind of get the game back to position basketball rather than positionless?
I think that's the possibility, right? I think if we continue to see these things, I think that I personally, if you're going to ask me for rule changes, my first rule would be let's either cut down the time of the game, go to some of the international minutes and things like that, or shorten the schedule. You know what I mean? Like literally, if you take off 6 games and get it down to, manageable where it's 3 to 4 games in a week versus, or really just 3 games a week. If you could get it down to 3 games a week for each team, you're talking about adequate time to potentially rest and recover so that your body's responding to those new demands a little bit better and versus trying to take the old or the new game and put it in the old schedule. There's been talks about, changing the 3-point line and things like that and maybe the spacing of the court, but I just don't know if that's going to drastically change things for what we've come to expect the game of basketball to look like at this point.
Are there any other injury trends in other sports that you're seeing that basketball has that shares a trait in terms of like, hey, there's injuries happening, football, baseball, hockey, that might make their way into the basketball world? Do you kind of see overall injury trends in sports, or do you think they're pretty singular in terms of each sport that they occur to?
Man, my first response was going to be the UCL the Tommy John epidemic in baseball, but that's so isolated to baseball because it's how we deliver a baseball. We don't see this Tommy John epidemic in football because we throw those two balls very differently, right? Like it stresses the elbow in a different pattern. They can happen, but we don't see it as frequently as we're seeing in baseball. I think the Achilles is going to be one that we see. I think that's kind of been the injury that's kind of getting watched across the board. We had a couple of guys in baseball tear their Achilles this year. You've had a couple of guys. Obviously, there's going to be Achilles tears in football. There was the famous one recently of the Niners Super Bowl. Was it Fred Warner that tore his Achilles? Like he just running out onto the field, So I think there are certain things that translate, go across all sports. And, is there something that we that can connect them and maybe provide some evidence to help mitigate risk across the board? I'd love to figure that out, but it's hard because the variables are so different. I spent one season, actually season and a half with my database tracking shoes in the NBA. So every model, I knew every Nike, this was the Giannis, this was the whatever. I knew the Ansas, I knew and I just could not find a correlation. Plus, I was having trouble. Guys were changing shoes at halftime. And then you got to think about every player has their own insert, or just about has their own insert in that shoe. So the LeBron puts on might feel differently to him than the LeBron if you bought the same model and put them on your foot, because you're getting the stock, soles and padding versus his orthotic that goes in there. So it's hard because it's just with injury data specifically, every little variable counts, and there's just so many variables. So we try to cut through the noise and figure some stuff out. What's applicable, what's not. And then you start to figure, okay, can we figure some stuff out? But even then, soccer plays outdoors, basketball plays indoors, turf versus court. There's all these different things that no matter what we do, we can't make equal across the board.
No, that makes total sense. Jeff, thank you very much for joining us. Appreciate your expertise. Can you let our audience know where you're available on social media, any upcoming projects, and anything our audience should be aware of?
So on all social media, I'm in street clothes. Like when a player is hurt, he's in street clothes. That's the website as well, instreetclothes.com. I'll have my player or my team evals and profiles before the season gets up. I always we look at the previous year, give it a little preview of the year, what's coming up, and try to look at how that medical staff ranks up against the other teams in the NBA. As we're getting ready to start the new year, where does your team sit? What's it look like? And paint a picture of what those medical staffs are facing, because I think they sometimes are unfairly scrutinized. It's like I said earlier, sometimes it's just bad luck, and that's not the medical staff's fault. You really got to do everything you can to look. I try to, in my writing, I try to create a complete picture of what each medical staff is facing and why. For example, with the Pacers, I know I'll be talking about the fact that they had multiple Achilles tendon tears. I guarantee you those guys are trying to evaluate why that was the case. You know what I mean? So, and then throughout the year, I post I try to do individual breakdowns when I can, and then on social media, posting out as much information about injuries when they occur. So keep you guys educated.
Awesome. Jeff, thank you very much. Much appreciated.
Appreciate it, guys.